Good afternoon. I do hope that you are having a blessed Tuesday this week as we continue our journey through Holy Week, as we continue to think about the life of Christ, what it was that he was doing throughout this week. I hope that these videos encourage you as you begin to think about the last week of Jesus when he's just before his crucifixion, leading up to it and following it. So we've been kind of following this journey, and today we're going to focus on what Jesus was doing Tuesday before Good Friday. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. You can find what he's up to in the book of Mark. And at this occasion, he just remind you of what he did yesterday. He cleansed the temple and he cursed the fig tree. So that's what we looked at yesterday. It's the cursing of the fig tree and the cleansing of the temple. So on today, Jesus is returning back to Jerusalem, back to the temple to have a conversation with the Pharisees, and proceeds to pass by the fig tree again and eventually have a conversation with the Pharisees. So I'm going to go ahead and read our text for today. It says this: as they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree had withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses." And they came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them?" Jesus said to them, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism from John from heaven or from man? Answer me." And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why then did you not believe in him?' But shall we say from man?" They were afraid of the people, for they held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." So, in this particular selection, this passage that we are looking at this today on Tuesday, two main episodes. One is the fig tree, and then the next one is Jesus in the temple. So Jesus is using this fig tree that he cursed yesterday to illustrate a point about faith. He's telling the disciples that their faith isn't necessary. In fact, it's a command. Believe in God. That's a command. To trust that God is able to do what he is able to do. So a Christian's faith, though, is in God. I think it's worth talking about the nature of Christian faith. You know, one of the things that's kind of popular to do right now is to go around asserting that you need to have faith. You need to have faith in something. Just believe something, we're kind of told. It doesn't matter what you believe, just believe something very strongly. But for a Christian, it's different. So we're not just to believe generically, believe in any old God, believe in any old deity, or believe whatever we want, but rather we're going to have a specific object of our faith, that being God. God is to be the object of our faith. So the way I was thinking about it and put it is this way, is that it's better to have a weak faith in the right object rather than a strong faith in the wrong object. See, the point is not the intensity of our faith, but rather the object of our faith. What is it that we are believing in? Are we believing in Jesus, or are we believing in whatever we want to believe? Now, if we put our faith in the wrong objects, it's gonna disappoint us, and we could believe that which is ridiculous. So we need to believe that which is true. We need to have the right object to place our trust in, rather than just having faith generically. See, we are to trust that God is able to do anything without doubting. In the book of James, James gives an analogy that a person who doesn't have faith, is like a person who goes into a mirror and forgets what he looks like a minute later. You see, James is kind of illustrating, like, we a lot of times forget that who God is. So when we come to God, we realize that God is the one who's able, not ourselves. It's not our faith. Some people will say that they have faith in faith, which is kind of nonsensical. Faith is the means by which we by which we are connected and in relationship with God. But it's not actually the faith itself that we're trusting, it's God. That's the point. A lot of times people make the mistake of beginning to treat the means as the ends. And in this occasion, a Christian, we view our faith as a means, not an end in and of itself. So after this object lesson with the fig tree, Jesus proceeds back to the temple that he just cleansed yesterday. So as you can kind of imagine, the tensions be high. He is not going in there being welcomed, people ready to see him. Today, the leaders are challenging him after he just cleansed the temple, turned over the money changers, and did all that. They're going to challenge Jesus now and be struggling with Jesus and just who he is. So he goes there and they challenge his teaching and authority. Now, we're just looking at one example of this. The passage that I was reading has to do with his authority, but his teaching will also be under attack as well when Jesus defending himself in the temple. But I think ultimately it all kind of comes down to his authority. You see, his teaching doesn't matter if he doesn't have the authority. The authority behind the teaching is important. And so the question they ask is actually not a bad one. By what authority do you do these things? You see, it's not a bad question to ask. The point I think that Jesus is going to make is that it's not the question that's wrong, rather the questioner that's wrong. The Pharisees and scribes and the religious leaders were not interested in Jesus' authority at all. They were just trying to find some means in which to attack him. And by trying to have him answer this question, they're hoping to kind of somehow trap Jesus somehow in what he says, and perhaps to dismiss him. Or perhaps to put him under arrest or something like that. So the challenge, I think the challenge is not coming from a place of actually seeking to know Jesus, but it's coming from a standpoint of we're trying to attack Jesus, figure out how to trap Jesus. And so that's why they're asking their question. So they ask Jesus, by what authority do they do these things? So Jesus, instead of answering their question directly, he asked them a counter question. This is very common theme in the life of Jesus. He often will receive questions throughout his ministry, and instead of answering it directly, he often directs the question back to the questioner. I think it's kind of interesting that Jesus continues to do that even in his final week. I think the point that a lot of times that Jesus is trying to get across with his questions, the counter questions that he asks, is like sometimes the problem is our question. We're asking the wrong questions. But in this case, I don't think it's the wrong question that they are asking. I think it's a good question, but they're not really interested in the answer. So he asked them a question about John the Baptist, who preceded Jesus in ministry. And he asked them, did John the Baptist, is he from God or is he from man? Now they realize pretty soon that they're in trouble. It's like here they are trying to trap Jesus, and now all of a sudden Jesus is trapping them. They're faced with a dilemma that they don't want to face themselves, because if they say they reason, if we say from that John the Baptist came from God, well, we didn't really follow John the Baptist, so Jesus will just say to us, well, why didn't you believe in John? Why didn't you be baptized? They're like, okay, so we can't say that. What about the other option? So if we say that that John the Baptist is from man, then people are going to hate us. People are going to get in trouble with us. They're going to riot because they held that John the Baptist is a prophet from God. So we can't say yes, we can't say no. What in the world are we going to answer? So they just answer, we don't know. Just avoiding the question whatsoever. They don't want to give an answer. And so Jesus, understandably, refuses to answer them. So it's like, all right, well, yeah, if you didn't answer my question, I'm not going to answer yours. Because obviously you're not really interested in having a dialogue right now. And even after that exchange, they continue to interact with Jesus in the temple. They attack his teaching. For example, his ideas of taxation and ultimate authority and resurrection of the dead, the greatest commandment. So they began to shift gears and attach Jesus' teaching. And he definitely avoids their traps that are designed to catch him in something that he says. But let's go back to that authority of Jesus. As I mentioned, it is a good question. And I think we do need to ask, where in the world did Jesus get this authority to say what he said, to do what he does, and to be the person that he is? Well, Jesus does answer this question in his resurrection. So after his resurrection, he gives this answer in Matthew 28:18. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Elsewhere in the book of John, it's consistent that Jesus's authority comes from the Father. So it's a delegated and given authority that he receives from the Father. So Jesus's authority comes from the Father. So he's doing what he's commissioned to do by the Father. So his authority comes from God the Father. In his transfiguration, for example, the disciples are commanded to listen to Jesus. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him, they are told. So the authority of Jesus comes from God the Father. God the Father gives Jesus all authority over heaven and on earth. So Jesus has the authority to say what he says, to do what he does, and no one ought to question him. So what are some applications for us today as we kind of think about what Jesus was doing today on Tuesday, almost 2,000 years ago? Well, one of the first things is faith in the correct object. I think it's always an important thing to remember is that we put our trust and faith in the right thing. We can't just go believing anything generically. We can't just go wishing and hoping things will be true, but we need to believe the right sorts of things about the right thing. So in this occasion, we need to believe in God and believe in his Son, Jesus. We need to put our faith in the correct object, not faith, not faith in whatever you want, but faith in that which is true and good and beautiful. We need to trust Jesus and we need to trust in God. So we need to have that kind of faith. Secondly, is the submission to Jesus's authority. The Pharisees and the religious leaders of the time, they did not submit themselves to Jesus's authority. They were in opposition to Jesus's authority. So if Jesus does have all authority in heaven and on earth, we must submit to him because he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's one of the exalted titles that Jesus receives. So we ought to submit to his authority. That means obeying what he says, listening to Jesus, obeying Jesus, trusting in Jesus. We need to submit to his leadership, not our own. So as we kind of go through today, I hope that these little short videos have been encouraging to you to kind of think about this Holy Week as we think about who Jesus is, what he did, and how it is that he rescued us. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave those below. I'd love to interact with you.